Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2014 application kit review. We have a lot of folks on the line. We were waiting because we still have a few folks trying to get onto the system. We have muted all of you so that there are no interruptions or background distractions for everybody. There are ways you may ask questions. If you are hooked up properly to the conference audio, you will be able to raise your hand by a little button. We will be able to unmute you to ask questions. And if you are not hooked up properly, there is the Q&A box where you may also send your questions. During the presentation, I do not think that it is going to take an hour, but based on questions we get, we are set to go in an hour and a half. This is Donna Enrico with DCED. I have MJ Smith as well, who will be presenting in the presentation, and staff are on our end. And again, we welcome you. And if anyone, what you should be seeing on your screen, your computer screen or whatever you're using to view the PowerPoint, is a PowerPoint presentation right now that says 2014 Community Development Block Grant Program. If you are not seeing that, you need to let us know by typing into the Q&A box. So to begin the presentation, I just wanted to go over a few basics about the 2014 timelines, a little bit about our allocation for 2014. The Commonwealth received $38,158,835. As you are aware, 85% of that goes to the entitlement program under Act 179. 13% is allocated to the competitive program, and the state receives 2% for its administration. Those are the numbers presented. And furthermore, in that 85% set aside for the entitlement program, 24% is allocated to our 27 entitlement cities, 38% for 125 entitlement boroughs, towns, and townships, and 38% goes to the 50 non-urban counties. The application deadlines are listed for those entitlement counties who are only applying for county funds, and the entitlement cities, the application deadline is 21st. And for entitlement boroughs, towns, and townships, and any counties applying on behalf of one or more entitlement boroughs or townships, the deadline is January 3rd, 2015. And as we go through the presentation and the requirements of this year, if there's a grantee that does not believe they can meet those deadlines, you should contact your grant manager prior to the deadline and explain why you cannot meet the deadline and request an extension. In requesting that extension, you will need to also put in there a date when you believe that submission will occur. There are not a lot of changes to the application, so we believe that these deadlines can be met, but we also understand there can be some issues with the timing of public hearings, etc. The competitive program, John, you could go ahead and advance the slides. The competitive program, this year we had increased the maximum amount that anyone can apply for under a competitive application to $750,000. Our priority still lies with infrastructure projects, those sewer and water projects that demonstrate a serious need. Problems on the health and safety issues in the area, those are still our #1 priority. One change that we had identified earlier is the fact that we will also entertain applications that will come in addressing slum and blight remediation or removal. But those projects, you must have a plan. We will not entertain applications that just use a shotgun approach to removing blight. Every in Pennsylvania could put an application in if we were to allow that. So if you do intend to put an application in addressing slum and blight, I would suggest that you contact myself or your grant manager for further instructions on what will be necessary in those applications. The deadlines for this year into next was that August 26th, there was round 1. We have made those awards for the last round, and we will be entertaining applications up to January 30th, 2015 for a second round of the 2013 funding. Go ahead and advance. So some of the changes the 2014 entitlement application. These changes will also apply to any competitive applications, but these are changes that we had to make in updating the application kit and forms. Some of the changes are not significant, but others are. So we wanted to go over them so that everybody understands what those changes are and where they are. The first one is your statement of assurances. All the language and provisions are the same. Several typos that were identified, so we removed the typos. The Fair Housing and Minority Women Business Enterprise requirements have some minor changes which we will be going over. A 4-factor analysis has been added to the fiscal year 2014 application kit. It will be required. We will be reviewing what that means in detail. The timeliness form has been updated. The benefits to minorities form has been updated. 3-year activity summary form has been updated, and where you will find what you may consider significant changes will be to the most recent activity description form, which we will be going over. I know that everybody is interested in survey documentation. This webinar will not cover it. The information that we want to provide to everyone is significant enough in itself that we will be covering that in a webinar held next Monday, the 20th at 1 p.m. Hopefully everybody received the CD&H alert, which gave instructions on registering for the survey documentation and methodology Monday. The budget form has also changed. So what's new about fair housing and minority women business enterprise requirements? One of the things in reviewing the application and as a result of our latest HUD monitoring, we had recognized that somewhere along the line our instructions failed to include the annual fair housing resolution adoption. While many of our grantees did do it, there were some who did not. So you will see in the latest guidance in the application kit is that in this process of preparing your 2014 application, you must adopt a fair housing resolution. There's a sample of that resolution in the sample plan that is on the Federal Resource Library. If you need to have a template, it's there. You must publish a fair housing notice in a newspaper of general circulation. That's not new. It is a reminder. And you must undertake annual actions to affirmatively further fair housing. DCED over the past 2 years in trainings has provided that information to grantees, and again, that is also available on the Federal Resource Library. I believe, and MJ can validate that, we are asking for annual reports to identify those actions. It is necessary for completion of our consolidated plan and our annual action plan.
And those are due in January. I believe it's the 3rd Tuesday of January.
Okay. Thank you, MJ. And we'd also like to remind everyone that annually you should be reviewing all the plans that have been prepared and adopted by the local grantee. An example is that a lot of times on the citizen participation, we get questions about can we post notices. You can absolutely post notices, but what we want to say is go back to your adopted plan. Have you revised it to include postings? And if you have not, you need to go and address your citizen participation plan to include that method of posting.
And we will be providing a webinar sometime in December on the plans. So we'll be going over what needs to be in your plans and how that follows through. Plans are not just a document that sits in your file. It is to be acted on throughout the year.
Okay, the next item we'd like to cover is the four-factor analysis and what is it and what requirements for each of the grantees. What it is an examination by the grantee to determine if 5% or more of your population is limited English proficiency. And you might be asking, why are we doing this? What is it? What we'd like to say is if you go back to your citizen participation plan, most of them, and it is in the Statement of Assurances, states that you must address other populations that do not speak English if that population is significant enough in your community. So it's not a new requirement, except the fact that now we're providing some additional direction, some additional documentation, so that we can support that if we have significant limited English populations in our communities, we are providing them or giving them an opportunity to comment on and participate in the HUD-funded programs to the extent that every other person in that community can participate. This is on HUD's radar screen. It is a part of the Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity requirements, and we do know that HUD has cited communities, not in Pennsylvania that I'm aware of, but other states, for not identifying these populations and providing them with information in the language specific to that population. The four-factor analysis will ensure that language is not a barrier to the HUD programs that are in your communities. It will provide equal opportunity for those folks, and it is especially important when you are doing direct benefit activities such as housing or public service activities. We will be going over an Excel spreadsheet which will be provided to everyone after this session via an email. It will also be added to the Federal Resource Library, but it takes several days for documentation to actually be uploaded to that particular website for the department. So we want to get it out. So as soon as the webinar is over, the PowerPoint will be forwarded along with this Excel spreadsheet that we will be going over to determine the population. So the importance is that if a grantee does not have a limited English proficiency population of 5% or more, there's a certification page in the application kit which must be completed, signed off, and included with your submission. You will know if you have 5% or less by this Excel spreadsheet that we will be reviewing in just a minute. But if your community is identified as having a limited English proficiency population of greater than 5% or greater, then there are some steps that you will need to do to prepare what's called a language access plan. John, could you bring up the Excel spreadsheet, please? So hopefully what you are seeing on the screen is a spreadsheet that has certain communities. It doesn't list all of the communities, but what we've asked the Penn State Data Center to do, and if you look on the bottom of this Excel spreadsheet, there are actually 3 tabs. The first tab says source, and that just lists where the data was pulled from. The second one is all municipalities, and that one lists all the municipalities in Pennsylvania. But we've asked the Penn State Data Center to pull out only those municipalities that have 5% or greater limited English proficiency populations, so that you don't have to look through all the data. If you just go to this third tab, it will identify those communities that have the populations. We did not exclude from our spreadsheet any of the direct federal entitlement communities, because we have other programs other than CDBG that can be the funds can be granted in those entitlements under the Home or the Emergency Solutions Program. So therefore, you will see entitlement communities listed. So the important part is to look at the darker blue column where it says percent of population that speaks English less than very well. All of the communities identified have a population of 5% or greater of some limited English proficiency population. So if you are doing activities at a county level, you will need to consider this, but if you are doing activities specific to the municipalities listed, you will need to look at the language access plan and determine what needs to be done. Now, you will also notice that column H on the spreadsheet says the percentage of population speaking the highest non-English spoken language. What that column does is it brings out what is the specific language, the highest percentage of that language spoken in that community that is the greatest. So for instance, if you look across that first line, it's Arntsville Borough in Adams County. They're saying that 8.7% of the population speaks English less than very well. That's total, all languages. But when you go to column H, 8.5% of the population speaks Spanish or Spanish Creole. So there's about 0.2% of the population that speak English less than very well, but in another language. So you have to compare both of them. If both of those columns exceed the 5%, a language access plan will be required to be submitted with your application this year. So I would suggest for everybody, once this Excel spreadsheet goes out, to look through it. If you have any questions on it, you know, we're going to provide a little bit more information on the requirements for that plan and why it's necessary. But I would suggest if you have particular questions for your particular communities, please get back with us with those specifics after the webinar. So as we said, if your community pops up on that tab and you have a population greater than 5% that speaks less than English less than very well, this plan is going to be necessary. It is very easy to read, but you do have to go in, and with all the templates that we provide, you have to make that specific to your community. So you will have to read it. You'll have to choose the appropriate paragraphs that apply to your community, and as I said, you will have to submit that with the application. Some of the things that you will be required to do as you identify these limited English proficiency populations, if you're doing direct benefit activities, you may have to make your documentation available in that native language. If you're doing an area benefit activity and you are in an area that has a significant limited English proficiency population, and you're doing a survey to determine the service area, you may need to provide the survey worksheet in a language different than English. MJ, because the Commonwealth has to publish our citizen participation plans and notices in a different language, there are, I want to say, programs that can help translate to keep down the cost. We do understand that translations are expensive. We have gone out and have translated different documents here at the department. They can be very, very expensive, but there are now programs. We will also provide you with a link to the HUD website, which will provide certain documents in different languages as well. So again, after the webinar, we will be providing that, but those are the things that you as a community may have to start doing. If we identify through the data that we're providing you with that limited English proficiency population of 5% or greater and you do not submit the required documentation, we will condition your contract, and you will not receive any funding. Although the contract will start, you won't receive any funding until that is submitted. I think we have, at this point, we do have one question in the question box. I'm going to try to address it. The question is the language access plan specific to the whole county if a county entitlement or to the project site for the application? Does it need to be revised each year depending on the project site? I think the answer to that question is if you are a county and you have a requirement to go into and make available information during your citizen participation process to all the communities, you will need to determine if in any of those communities you need to make your outreach available in a different language. You certainly need to pay particular attention if any of those communities are doing direct benefit activities such as housing rehab. I will use the example, if you have a significant Hispanic or Spanish population in your community and you're doing housing rehab, and those folks are owner-occupants of housing units as well as the English-speaking population, they have a right to have that information presented in their native language so that they understand and have access to the same benefits that everyone else in the community has. And as I said, there are lots of programs, or maybe I shouldn't say lots of programs, but there are programs out there that will help you do the translation, and HUD has made some of this information available on their website that we will provide to you. Well, we don't see any other questions at this time, so I'd like to go on and talk about the activity description form, which is probably, has the most changes. And I want to emphasize that all of the activities submitted in the 2014 application round must use the new form that's included in the kit. So these changes are designed to ensure that grantees provide complete and accurate information, which will help DCED in reviewing the applications for eligibility and fundability. Fundability is meeting a national objective of the program requirements. You can go, John. Box 5 is new on the application kit. Box 5 asks if it is a multi-year project. You're either going to type in there yes or no, and if you type in yes, you have to identify the program years that are using funding for the same activity. We will be bringing up 2 samples, and we will show you how it's to be filled in and what you put there, but I'd like to first go through a couple of these new items on the list. Box 6A is a HUD matrix code. This code should correspond to how you set the activities up in IDIS, number 1. But if you're questioning what your project is, I cannot emphasize enough to go to the back of the application kit, pages 60 to 71, to read through the back and identify where your project fits best. Those come right off of the IDIS system. Tina has provided those every year for us to include in the application kit. And so it would correspond, whatever you put in your application kit should correspond to what you have on your IDIS system. We compare those PRO2 reports to what we have listed. There's some cross-checking for the environmental review to ensure that we are doing the right activities, and a lot of you will understand it's very important now that we have an invoice process that it be consistent so that everybody knows exactly what activity is being reviewed or invoiced for or having an environmental review done. Box 11 on the form is new, and when we get to the form, the sample that we've provided, MJ will address it, but this is a part of what's being required in our consolidated plan for every activity that the Commonwealth provides funding to. It is pretty easy to read and just to select a goal, but she will address that when we pull up the form. John, could you pull up the sidewalk, the sample sidewalk project? So we've completed an activity description, and we are going to place this sample along with 2 other samples on our website again, so that folks can understand what type of information we're looking for and how we're looking for it to ensure that there is consistency and clarity in what we are reviewing. As I said, everything on there should stay the same, or it looks pretty familiar. But again, when we go to box 5, what we've done here is said that this is not a multi-year funded project. And our activity that we're actually doing is that we want to remove some corner curbs and sidewalks that don't meet the ADA requirements. So we want to do some handicap accessibility. We've chosen the 6A box. John, it is a drop-down menu. So again, if you look at pages 60 to 71 to identify your project where it fits best, you just need to come back and click on that particular drop-down box, the matrix code number that's appropriate for the activity that you are proposing. In this example, I've chosen sidewalks because it is not part of a street project, but they are actually going in and just working on the sidewalks and the curbing. It is possible that some of the activities could have we could have selected the street improvements because the street improvements definition under the HUD matrix codes talks about doing curb work. Either or, as long as we can fit it into the appropriate HUD matrix codes. But once you choose it here, O3L sidewalks, when you jump to doing your budget, it should show up on your budget line item as O3L sidewalks, not street improvements. When you come in and do your environmental review, you shouldn't identify street improvements. It should be identified as sidewalk improvements. So, John, if you could just go ahead and click off the O3L to keep it at sidewalks. And the activity name, again, just trying to identify what is it that you are proposing under this activity. Clear and concise. We aren't asking for novels, just something that will give us an idea of what's being proposed out in the community. And in this case, handicap accessibility at specified intersections in the township. When you go to set up in IDIS, it should be sidewalks, handicap accessibility. Again, you're going to see a theme where we're trying to make sure that the people that are touching different processes in this department should have no questions as to what activity we're looking at when you're either invoicing or doing environmentals or the grant managers or someone else has to look at the application.
And one of the things, too, is when you are doing this form, make sure you pass these names on to your financial people, to the people who are doing your environmental review, so that they are picking up the same name and carrying it on through the forms. We can't emphasize that enough because this all goes into reporting, and it makes our life easier if we can follow the same activity throughout the process of the grant. I also want to point out the fact that if you notice under the matrix code, there is no architectural barrier removal code. You must, if you're doing that, you must assign it to an actual activity, such as in this case, the sidewalks. or if you were doing it on a public facility, putting a ramp in, then you would identify it there. There is not a standalone architectural barrier removal. So please, don't put that on as your project matrix code, because you won't find one.
Okay, thank you, MJ. The activity location in this particular one, we've made it look like a county is proposing the activity in one of the non-entitled municipalities. We've termed it Lower Allen Township. The national objective that we're meeting with this is LMI, and box number 10. Box number 10 is not new, but we've reviewed past applications, and it really has not been completed appropriately. What we're trying to do is to get you to look in the regulations, look under the national objective benefit, and pick out where your activities will most appropriately fit, because your support documentation for national objective is going to be spelled out in the regs there, and that's the documentation that we are going to be looking at. And if you look at the one we've completed, it references the citation in the federal regulations as to where we picked this out, and all the language that is written in there comes directly from the regulation. And it says that this is an activity that serves to remove materials or architectural barriers. I did not make that up. That comes right out of 208A2II. For the mobility or accessibility of elderly or severely disabled adults, that we will be presumed to qualify. There's some language. This is a limited box with characters, so I couldn't type it all out, but what I did type was enough of the language that makes the reader of this activity understand that, okay, if I went to that regulation, it suits the activity that we are proposing, and that's how the national objective is going to be met. So there's other information that is also included in there, but this is what fits, this is what will explain it, and it'll give the reader that if you need additional information, we could go back to 570-208A2II to fill in any gaps that there may be. But this will allow no one to question why we chose that particular national objective. So under the goals addressed, it's another drop-down menu that MJ is going to address.
Okay, this is a new item on the activity description, and it is basically because of the fact that Pennsylvania now has to submit all of our reports to HUD electronically. You may have been aware back in, I believe it was April or May, you got notice of the new con plan. If any of you looked at that, that is how we are reporting to HUD. We have to be able to identify every activity by a goal. And Pennsylvania has developed 11 goals for our programs, and every activity needs to be in one of those goals. And as you see there in the drop-down, they're pretty generalized. You should be able to fit any of your programs into one of those. If you have any problem, again, please contact your grant manager. They would be able to aid you into which one you should be putting that activity in. This also then carries on to the CAPER. Once we receive your application, we have to go back into our con plan and enter all of your activities so that they get picked up when we go to do our finalized reporting to HUD. So again, we have to identify those activities by one of our goals. And of course, HUD will look at how we are addressing our goals as part of our annual reporting. So this is very important, though, like I said, they're pretty general, so you should be able to easily put your activity in one of those.
And before we move on to the remainder of the activity description, I do want to point out that under the 6A box, the HUD matrix codes, it doesn't give you an option to select an other activity. Not all of the HUD matrix codes are in there. We're going to work to get an extra box which just will allow you to type something in as other. It is on the budget, but we did not put it in the 6A, so we're going to hope to update that form, and whenever it's available on the website, we will let you know. To me, it doesn't make a real big difference because very rarely do we get anyone coming in for activities in that other box. So most of what we do get in as proposed activities is covered under 6A. But I wanted to let everyone know we have identified that we need to add that extra box in there. The cost is still the same in that on the number 8, you just make sure that in box 8 that your figures are there. If you are doing a multi-year activity, that should be your other federal dollars, or if you have other federal sources of funding in there, that should all be included. If you're using any type of state, local, or private, and our boxes will not add that for you. So just make sure that everything adds up and check off if you put something in there that other funding is in there, is it committed or is it not? Because we will be coming back to ask. So you might as well just do it up front. When we get down to the bottom of the form, the low mod benefit test, again, these areas down here need to be completed. Under low mod area benefit, you're either going to use ACS data or you're going to use survey data. And it's either one or the other. At this point, you can't combine them. For limited clientele, if it's income eligibility, you're going to tell us that everyone who is served is going to be completing an income survey, and at least 51% of the clients will be low and moderate income. If it's nature and location, you're going to describe why you've selected that and put support documentation as to how it qualifies under nature location. When you do presumed benefit, your activity description should be enough to describe which one of those presumed categories are being met by the activity you're proposing. And in our example here, your national objective in the regulations for handicap accessibility states that you're removing certain design features that are impediments to the elderly and severely disabled. So you click those off on here under the presumed and then describe how that activity will benefit the above designated clientele. Again, removal of those materials that restricts the mobility for elderly and severely disabled. Construction is limited to the removal of certain design features. That's how the activity qualifies and how it meets the presumed benefit. Same thing with housing. You'll go in, if you're just doing rehab, you're going to check that, but you're also going to come down and check off, are you doing single structures, 2-unit structures, multi-units? If you're doing multiple types of housing, you can check different boxes there, but just make sure what it is going to match and it's complete when it comes in. Your slum and blight test under B, whether it's area or spot, all the supporting documentation will need to come in. And then as we scroll down for the last urgent need test, those conditions need to be met. And if you're doing it under urgent need, you'll need to submit the documentation to support those 4 tests. And I can say that I think in probably the last 20 years, there may have been 1 or 2 activities that have come in qualifying under urgent need, and they have come in when there have been significant natural disasters that have hit. So it's not something that we see often. So when we come into the activity description, again, we've broken it out so that we can address the 3 areas that we need to have explained. Number 1, what is the problem? What's occurring that needs to be corrected? And that should be your number 1. So I'm not going to go down and read all through this because I know everybody can read, but there's enough information in there to tell whoever is reading this particular activity description what the problem is and where that problem is. Number 2, how will that problem be corrected? It talks about what we're going to do. We're going to remove an estimated 8 curb cuts and reconstruct them for the identified streets, and that the project will include the demolition of existing curbs, forming and reinforcing the area with appropriate rebar. Approximately 40 cubic yards of concrete will be used for the construction with truncated materials for the visually impaired. Whatever information you can provide us, which helps us understand what that project is going to be. And again, number 2, when you do this project, whatever you put in number 2 is how will this problem be corrected. When you submit your environmental reviews, there has to be something in there which also suggests that this is the activity. When you do the environmental review, it shouldn't be different than what we see here on the activity description. There have been just way too many instances where the environmental reviews come in and the activity looks nothing like what was submitted in the original application. There has to be some consistency there. Number 3, it talks about who are going to be the beneficiaries. Well, in this case, these are elderly persons or adults meeting the definition of severely disabled adults. That's how we can do this activity. What also is new, and we're going to get to it on a slide or two. I think we want to go back to the slides now, John, just to briefly go over, and we're going to come back to this just quickly. Next slide. We've already gone over the activity names, the location. We're going to just flip to the next slide. Again, activity description and national objective needs to be complete so we can understand the problem and the solution. The narrative should tell us a story about that project. Identifying the service area, your project needs to, your project area may be different from your service area, and that's why we ask for the maps to come in, because you're going to have to support where the project is and then where your service area is. National objective, we've gone over that. Include your support documentation, census maps, aerial maps, photos, anything that helps us understand that particular project. One thing that I cannot emphasize enough is that, especially under county applications, you need to visit the project sites. You need to be talking with the people who are proposing that project to understand exactly what it is they're expecting from that project. And you need to be, as the grant administrator, need to be making that determination, is the project area appropriate? An example of one that we had a year or 2 ago when we finally called and asked why, there was one household benefiting from a street improvement project. The question was, did you review the service area? No, I haven't gone and viewed the service area. Well, how do you know there's only one project? We pulled up an aerial map from Google which showed like 10 homes on that particular street that was being reconstructed. Well, the issue was, well, the project is occurring right in front of this house, so that's why it was selected. That's not appropriate. There's enough information in the application kit to help guide you through how you determine your service areas. But I can't, as I said, going on site and reviewing what it is you're proposing in these applications is very important for you to understand. Is the information that you've received from the local municipalities accurate, and does it comply with the federal requirements? And I can assure you that if staff come to me or MJ, these are the questions that we're asking. We're asking for the documentation to be reviewed, which are the maps, which are photos, anything that'll give us, a confidence level that we are approving eligible, fundable projects.
Donna, before you go on, we have some questions about the pages.
Oh, I'm going to stop now because as we got back, we had a few questions. We're going to try and answer those questions. And what I want to let you folks know is that while I don't believe everybody can see the questions coming in, we will put them on a Q&A, and as we respond to them, we will upload those as well onto the website. Okay, the question is on box 8, the cost for the project. If you are doing a multi-year project in box 8, would you just put the amount of this year's allocation or all of the year's funding added together? Same question for all of the budget sheets. We're going to go over the budget sheets, but in particular on block 8 where it says CDBG, that line is for this year's allocation only. When you go down under federal, the next line under federal would be where you would put other years' funding, or if you're using other federal sources, that would be combined. And what I would suggest is that on the budget page, or where you explain the budget narrative, you would be identifying how much in those other fiscal years is being used, or what other federal sources you are going to be using. But the first line is only for this year's allocation. That would include all your construction costs, and if you're including soft costs, delivery costs, such as your environmental cost or your labor standards cost, that should all be rolled into that budgeted line item. Do we have another one?
Yeah, you have 2 more.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. It says on the activity box 5, do I put just the fiscal years that are open contracts or all previous fiscal years that contribute to the project? I know that we have a few multi-year activities that are going beyond the 3-year activity time frame. And I want to take a little time to address that, but going forward, it should really be those fiscal years identified that would be a part of this particular contract. So if you've done phases before, we're not concerned about the phased money. It's what would be done under this particular contract that will be let. So this year's funding and any other funding that's going into this particular part of the contract. I will have to think through, how we're going to address those that have used previous years that go beyond and have done the project. There's a few of those, but it shouldn't impact everybody. So, as I said, just let me think through how we want those, and we will address it in the written response when we get them up on the Q&As.
Questions on limited English?
We had a question about the limited English proficiency, where they are identifying about 20% of the residents of a community being of limited English proficiency. And the grantee is explaining that those are residents that are housed in a federal prison. Can that be explained so that a plan is not required? And the answer to that is yes. If there are these specifics where the population is being skewed because of a certain type of institutional use, such as the state correctional facilities or federal correctional facilities, we would just have to have some kind of support documentation submitted which justifies why you don't have to do that limited English proficiency or the language access plan. We have another question about housing rehab funded each year when it's a multi-year. John, if you could bring up, we're going to, before we finish off, our other example we wanted to show you was housing rehab. So hopefully everyone can see the activity description on the screen that is for a housing rehab project. And this one, we did make it a multi-year because we have a lot of communities who will fund housing rehab each year. What we're looking for here, you'll see the naming conventions and how we would like it spelled out on the other boxes. But on box 5, we made it a multi-year and said, yes, we're using fiscal year 11 and 2013 funds in addition to the 2014 funds in the amount of $110,250. So that CDBG, the $110,250, would only be what you're carving out of your allocation this year for that particular activity. The other federal, the $100,000, that would be your previous year's amounts in there, that they were committed. This one happens to be using some local funds. So the total budget right now for doing all the housing is $222,550. So to go on, and somebody else had this question, John, if you could just keep scrolling through here, you'll see the low mod benefit test, how those activities are justified down below to meet those low mod, and that's low mod housing. Keep going. We're going to keep going. We've got our justification here. Now, when you do the activity description, don't go too far, John. What we would like here identified is, what are you doing for your current $110,000? Even though you've done previous years, we want to know what we're getting for this particular pot of funding. So in here, what we've said is that the borough had identified through windshield surveys and their code enforcement office approximately 65 housing units with visual exterior code deficiencies. The borough is currently operating a housing rehab program, so that tells us it's ongoing, that provides up to $25,000 for code-related improvements and up to $6,000 for lead remediation activities. So that gives us some ideas, and information that suggests that, okay, we know we're doing code-related, we know there's a limit there, we know we're also doing lead remediation, there's a limit there. So while, the limit is $31,000 per housing unit, that doesn't mean that's the average cost. It also says the borough's adopted DCED's Housing Rehab Guidebook as the foundation for the program, that each housing unit assisted will meet these minimum requirements at the close of each individual project. Just if you're not using our Housing Rehab Guidebook as your minimum standard, you should be addressing it there so we know exactly what we're going to be reviewing your program against when we're out monitoring. And then in the number 3, when we talk about who are the beneficiaries, we're talking about, again, this allocation of money that we anticipate doing for income-eligible owner-occupied units with this particular funding. So it's pretty clear what we're doing. There are pieces of the program that are explained here, which help us identify exactly what's going on. And again, when you're doing your environmentals, and we'll get more into that as the training goes on, but it's easy for staff here to identify what you've said you're doing. And your environmental clearances should match up to what you've stated. And if this is a multi-year and a reevaluation, you're reevaluating based on these 4 proposed units.
Yeah, and if you write your description well enough here, you can just cut and paste and put that in your environmental review record, so it's not having to rewrite something. Again, make sure the person who's doing the environmental review gets a copy of this activity description so they are writing their description for the environmental review in the same manner you wrote it for the application.
One of the things I want to add is that on the bottom it says if you don't have enough room to add an additional sheet of paper. And we do encourage that if you cannot put everything into the blocks that are provided. But what we would ask is that on that extra piece of paper that you would list or title it as D, activity description, and you would put on there number 1 and the question, and then answer it. And then if it's block 2 that you're addressing, you put number 2 in the question and address it so that we know that those 3 questions have been answered. Number 4 is going to take an additional, if you're proposing a community facility, you are going to have to add a piece of paper because there's nothing fillable in that block. But as you are doing, answering those questions, you can either answer them in under any of the questions above or provide us with that additional information. I will let you know that HUD has hit us hard in their last review on any of the public community facilities because we have not had documentation in the files to fully support all of those questions. So staff will be reviewing those. We may be going back to last year's to update any information necessary for community facilities in the previous years. So John, we go into the project budget. As you see here, the only thing that you are going to list here under CDBG is the amount of money that you're requesting off of the front for this year. And so we're talking about, what is our construction cost? We're going to also include in those CDBG dollars the environmental review costs. The local costs are going to pay for the professional fees, which may be your housing rehab inspector or an outside third-party inspector, a risk assessor. You're using other local funds for that. So this it will not include your other funding. It says that you will attach a page to itemize the cost for each line item attached to this. What we want you to do is tell us what you estimate each of your 4 homes to be in those construction costs, your environmental review, as well as your professional services for your other fees. On that budget, you may put on there the other previous years that you've done and what your actual results have been, but this budget should fit what you have on the front page in box 8. And while your project, what we didn't include here is it does say to attach that completed estimated budget narrative. We are going to provide an example when we upload these, so it will be included. It's not included for the webinar, but on your completion time frame, you need to address these types of items. This one is particular to the housing rehab, so it talks about, a process that would take you through the 3-year time frame to complete those 4 units and some of the very detailed tasks that need to be done and when you anticipate that. Obviously, for a public construction project, you may not have those types of items in there, but what we're expecting for every project to come in with these benchmarks or similar benchmarks that would be particular to your activity and give us a time frame. This should help you keep on track for your 3-year time frames as well as us keeping on task with your progress for each of these activities. And if we see something that goes beyond the 3 years, if you have not explained it or justified it, we will be coming back to you to ask for that justification because we are still trying to keep up with having activities completed within the 3-year time frame. Those 3-year activity extensions are not automatic. Then you want to go to and then while we've provided the environmental tip sheets, they are not required, but we would highly recommend that whoever helps complete your environmentals for these activities, that you provide them with the activity descriptions, you let them review the tip sheets to see what's going to be the level of review. This is not an exempt, housing rehab is not an exempt activity. John, could you scroll back up to exempt? What we have tried to do is we have tried to look at, these are the activities listed in the regulations. When you see that 58.34, that's 24 CFR 58.34, those are taken right out of the regulations. Those are the types of activities that require an exempt determination. It doesn't say other where you can put in housing rehab. It just isn't there. It doesn't belong there. So you go on to the next category, categorically excluded, not subject to the laws and authorities at 35B. If you're not doing one of these activities, if it's not this activity, then it's not a categorically excluded, not subject to. So you have to keep going on. So let's see if the next one applies. So now we have categorically excluded subject to. We have our borough. We know we're doing housing rehabilitation. And if you look at the third line there, which John is highlighting, it specifically states that if you're doing rehabilitation of residential buildings, 1 to 4 units, when the density is not increased, land use is not changed, the footprint of the building is not increased or in a floodplain or wetland, then you know this is where your review starts. It doesn't start at exempt. It starts here. This is what you're going to build your review upon. And this is what everybody should be starting with, is to look at these tip sheets and say, here's how much work we're going to get into. So we can go on. And I think we go back to the PowerPoint, John, please. You can advance the slide. We've gone over all of that. And again, with the public facilities, this is a little bit different. We've gone over that. Just make sure that information is in there. Next slide. We've had questions about income surveys, and we have been trying to address them as they come in. You are permitted to do a survey if you do not agree with the American Community Survey data. However, I want everyone to know that there will be exceptions where we will be discussing when you may not be able to provide a survey to justify an activity. We will go into that in detail on Monday. Next slide. We've already gone over the budget summary form. Just make sure that your activities are transferred back to the budget summary form in the same line items that you have, or the same matrix codes that you identified them in earlier in the application. Please make sure that your activities add up to your allocation amount. Please make sure that you have checked to see that your admin does not exceed 18%, that your public service activities do not exceed more than 15%, and to make sure that any clearance and demolition or anything that's categorized under your slum and blight or urgent need national objectives do not exceed 30%. Those are things that we often have to make changes because there are simple mistakes made, but we're asking you to double check, and if they aren't right, you'll be asked to redo.
And whole dollar amounts.
Yes, yes. Please make them in whole dollar amounts. Additional information, as I said, anything that we've gone over today, we are going to send to you. It will be placed on the website as soon as it's uploaded, but we have a actual, I think, 2-person marketing shop that uploads all of the department's information. So this is in the queue. It'll take a couple days to actually be uploaded. So at this point, I think we have a couple more questions that we're going to answer, and then, as I said, we appreciate everybody being on the line, and we will make the Q&As available as well. The question that came in is, it says, with the project timetable, instead of listing estimated dates, can we list certain numbers of weeks or months to reach significant milestones, meaning the ERR is completed within 3 months, project design, bidding 4 months, etc. I would suggest that you use the month and year that these things will be completed so that you have a benchmark to follow. By putting in just months, it doesn't give us an idea of, are you waiting for one task to be done before the next task starts, or is there overlap? Because once you receive your contract, there are things that can start immediately. And so there will be certain overlaps. So we would like to have it put in by a month and year. You don't have to get so specific to the days. I know that on our examples you will see that, but that gives you a better time frame to be able to follow. I have a question that says that some time ago there was mention that changes were going to be made to the 3-year plan. So they stopped the process and there was no mention of the 3-year plan. I would say please contact me after the webinar because I'm not quite sure what that is. I know that what we said, and we didn't go over in detail, but the 3-year activity summary page, it is page 34 and 35 in the application kit. John will try to bring it up. What we did was we made changes to that form, and
we identified it by matrix code.
Right. Here are the instructions, but if you go to the actual template, the form, if you notice down the sideline, the list of activities on the far left side, those HUD matrix codes and activities now correspond to the budget. That's the only significant change that I can remember speaking about. So whoever asked that question, I would just ask that please, call me after the webinar so we can talk, but that was the change. And again, this now will correspond to what has to go into the state's consolidated plan. It will also should match your budget in the back when you submit your entire allocation. And if you scroll just up a little bit, John, when it says year 1, that's your current year. That's fiscal year 2014. Year 2 would be what your projections are for next year, and year 3 would be 2 years down the road.
And when you're filling this out, as Donna mentioned, we use this for our consolidated plan and our action plan. We actually listed all of the activities and then determine what our goals are to send to HUD, and again, we have to respond to CAPER. So don't make this just, oh, I'm doing sewer this year, so I'm going to put sewer in for the next 3 years or the next 2 years. It should relate back to your actual plan. So your immediate activity would be what's happening this year. Your short-term activity should be what's in year 2, possibly year 3. And then, of course, you're working maybe up to 5 years, it may be in your plan. But you want to identify what you're going to fund for 2015, 2016 through this plan. We use that to report back to HUD.
I just want to mention, too, we glossed over the benefits to minorities form. It does state, and that's page 33, John, if you just go up. There was some confusion as to what the past 3 years were in the instructions, so we've put it on there. We need 2011, 12, and 13 identified with your most current minority data that you have available to you by census, or if you did a survey, the information you have for those. We are working with the Penn State Data Center to provide us with updated information on the minority populations. I know we had done that several years ago. We are now going to go back and have them do a tabulation for us based on the municipalities that we're serving. So that will take a couple weeks for that new data, but you use whatever you have available at the time right now. And again, I can't emphasize, we're going to check to see if we have any other questions, but the activity description form that is included in the fiscal year 2014 application must be used with your submissions. We will review your applications. If they aren't complete, if they aren't clear, you will get contract conditions to request additional information, but we will be contracting. We will be starting the clock for that 3-year activity time frame. So please make sure that whatever you submit, that someone who is not familiar with your particular area or project, that they would be able to understand exactly what it is you're proposing, how it meets the eligibility requirements under the regulations, how it meets a national objective. The last HUD review of our applications and our approvals of activities was somewhat excruciating. There were a lot of conflicting information in some of the project descriptions, not enough to determine whether they were mostly fundable, but because of some of the conflicting language that was used in the descriptions, I know that we get comfortable because we know you, we understand who you are, we may pick up the phone to get that clarification, and if we haven't put it in the file, when somebody from the outside comes looking at it, we have just have way too many questions. So hoping that these changes will help eliminate the questions that HUD has had on our review of the activities. We have two more questions. It says, for multi-year CDBG projects, does that amount go on the budget summary under other as well? I have to go to my budget summary form. On the budget, we have 4 columns, CDBG program income. I think I glossed over that. It is on one of the slides. If you intend to use program income for an activity, it must be put in there. And in the other column, that should be all your other sources that you've identified on your activity descriptions. So I hope I've answered that question. Plan 72. The next question is, do we have something scheduled for training pertaining to the additional plans noted on page 72 of the application? Will this be a webinar? I know that I can sometimes literally, interpret what is read there, and it says additional plans. I have to say, everything that is listed should already be in place. They're not additional. They have always been required by the program. These are resources and documents that are listed on page 72 of the application kit. But in reference to will we be covering them in a webinar, yes, MJ and staff here intend to conduct a webinar to go over what's required in the plans, when they should be reviewed and updated. So if you do not have one of those plans in place, you will be required to get one of those plans in place. Okay, and I'm going to say that this is the last question. If you have additional questions after we end today, please submit them to either MJ or myself and copy your grants manager because, again, as I said, we want to make sure that we do up a Q&A paper and have it available to everyone. It says if there is a federal entitlement community within a county, does that county need to consider the population of that federal entitlement community in their language access? My answer to you is your activity going to benefit that federal entitlement community, and to what extent is it going to benefit? And if it is a great benefit to that entitlement community, then yes, you would have to include it in the language access plan. But if you, as a county, are not going to touch that entitlement community, you would identify that while the county does have significant populations, they're not populations that would be addressed by your allocation of CDBG funds. So with that, it does not appear that we have any additional questions at this time, and I appreciate, again, everybody's attendance on the webinar. And if you have any follow-ups, please do email or call into the office here. Thank you very much.